Exploding shells, poisoned cigars, seductive sex assassins. The United States' very own CIA spent years planning and executing over 600 attempts to take out the Cuban leader Fidel Castro, with not a single one being successful, and the insanity of the attempts themselves blows the number of them out of the water. It was a series of schemes so harebrained that when the ugly truth eventually came out, then President Gerald Ford signed Executive Order 11905, which read, "No employee of the United States government shall engage in or conspire in political assassination." But before we get to the finer points of all these deranged failed assassinations, you may find yourself asking why the CIA felt the need to spend so much time and resources trying to permanently remove the Cuban leader. Well, it was largely thanks to Castro that Cuba became the first communist state in the Western Hemisphere. While he was enrolled at the School of Law of the University of Havana, Fidel Castro participated in resistance movements in the Dominican Republic and Colombia before becoming active in Cuban politics in the 1950s. But Castro's political aspirations faced a major hurdle when Fulgencio Batista seized power over Cuba as a dictator. So Castro organized a resistance movement against Batista, using guerrilla warfare and propaganda to diminish Batista's military power and win the support of the Cuban people, attracting more volunteers to Castro's revolutionary cause. Once they'd forced Batista to flee the country in 1959, Castro assumed authority over the new ruling government of Cuba as prime minister and would serve in the role for a tenure of 17 years, eventually becoming president in 1976, a role he then held until 2008. This all doesn't seem so bad, unless you're working for the CIA, that is. Back before Castro was running the show down in Cuba, the US government had long held suspicions about his political leanings. After all, he was a fiery, outspoken revolutionary. When he eventually assumed power, Castro's Cuba aligned itself with the Soviet Union, which, of course, was cause for concern for the United States, especially given how close Cuba is to Florida and thus the US mainland. The CIA even proposed a plan to eliminate Castro to President Eisenhower and later President John F. Kennedy when he was elected in 1960. With that second one, they were really barking up the right tree. Kennedy couldn't stand Castro and hoped to make humbling Cuba one of the major achievements of his presidential administration. The plan began with the United States cutting diplomatic ties with Cuba and launching an invasion into the Bay of Pigs. In case that name isn't ringing any bells, the Bay of Pigs invasion was an attempt by the CIA to overthrow Castro and prevent the spread of communism into Latin America and the United States. There had been mass immigration of Cubans following the Cuban Revolution in 1959, owing to political repression and disillusionment with life under Castro. These Cuban exile forces were trained and organized by the CIA. Known as Brigade 2506, this 1,400-man force with the backing of the CIA attempted to overthrow Castro, but was quickly defeated by the Cuban armed forces. The CIA even tried to use American B-26 bombers disguised as Cuban Air Force planes to conduct airstrikes in Cuba, but ultimately the Bay of Pigs invasion failed. So the United States looked to other ways to take down Castro, and to say they got creative would be an understatement. The Bay of Pigs invasion was arguably the first attempt at killing Castro, as the failed US-backed invasion could have easily resulted in his death. However, when this failed, the Central Intelligence Agency turned to methods involving a lot more subterfuge. The former head of the Cuban Secret Service, Fabian Escalante, who was charged with protecting Fidel Castro from many of these would-be assassins, claimed that over the course of his life, Castro survived more than 630 assassination attempts from the CIA, Cuban exiles, and others. One of the most famous ways the CIA tried to assassinate Castro came close, but no cigar. Well, actually, there was a cigar involved. Look through some of the photos of Castro in his heyday. You'll see he was never far from a cigar. The Cuban leader apparently had been smoking them since the tender age of 14, and toward the end of the Eisenhower administration, his penchant for cigars became a crucial tool in one of the CIA's plans to make his smoking habit even deadlier. As revealed by the Church Committee, a congressional oversight committee that hoped to rein in some of the CIA's worst behaviors, the CIA attempted to poison a box of Castro's favorite cigars in 1960. On August 16th of that year, a member of the CIA's Office of Medical Services was handed a box of the Cuban leader's preferred brand and given instructions to treat them with a lethal poison, botulinum toxin. This is one of the most poisonous biological substances in the world, known to cause muscle paralysis, and could have caused Castro to die when the tainted cigar made contact with his mouth. Fun additional fact for you, botulinum toxin is also used in Botox injections, in case you ever needed another reason to avoid those like the plague, because they are kind of a sort of plague if you think about it. Apparently, this particular poisoned cigar never reached Castro. However, there have long been some conflicting reports that a CIA agent approached a New York police chief inspector with a plan to place an explosive cigar on Castro's person while he was in New York visiting the United Nations. There isn't as much evidence of this exploding cigar plot, so it's believed to be more of an urban legend. But the poisoned cigar's existence is at least confirmed by the records of the CIA's Operations Division. Yet another reason to quit smoking, which Castro actually did in 1985. Some attempts to kill off Castro were a little less Austin Powers and slightly more of what you'd expect when you picture the CIA assassinating a United States geopolitical rival. Robert Mayhew, an attorney working with the CIA who was also the former top aide of famous weirdo Howard Hughes, acted as an intermediary and helped to organize some of the 5 more conventional assassination squads that were sent to kill Castro after the Bay of Pigs failed. But just because those attacks were more conventional doesn't mean they weren't the kind of thing you'd see in movies. One of the team leaders was a mobbed-up gambler named John "Handsome Johnny" Rosselli. He worked with 2 other CIA assets, James O'Connell and William King Harvey, to build an Ocean's 11-style collection of assassination dream teams. If that wasn't weird enough, William King Harvey was also commonly known as America's James Bond. You really can't make this stuff up, folks. Of course, despite involving a cast of characters that George Clooney would probably bust down your door to audition for, all these hit squads failed to take out Castro. Assassins were stalking Castro around every dark corner, but they were always thwarted or caught. There was even talk of blowing Castro up with a grenade during a sports game, which was an audacious plan that, spoilers, never came to be. Members of the 5th group of assassins were arrested by Cuban authorities in early 1963 as they were establishing a sniper's roost in Havana to gun down Castro from a distance. In an example of eerie irony, Kennedy would be assassinated by a sniper later that same year, while Castro continued to live on. Clearly, the CIA needed some more experienced personnel to give Castro a dirt nap. When encountering trouble getting a certain job done, sometimes it's best to call on an expert, someone whose real specialist knowledge of a craft can help you get the result you're after. So with the job in question being the death of another country's political leader, whose expertise did the CIA decide to call on? Well, who else but the Mafia? In an operation codenamed Family Jewels, get your laughs out now, the CIA once again reached out to our good friends Robert Mayhew and Johnny Rosselli to marshal their Mafia contacts for a job. The CIA wouldn't need to get their hands dirty this way, given that a lot of the Mafia already had their knives out for Castro. His communist regime had quashed a lot of their financial interests in Havana, and Castro needed to die for the cash to start flowing back into Mafia pockets. Rosselli reached out to 2 infamous mobsters, Santos Traficante and Momo Salvatore Giancana, otherwise known as Sam Gold. These 2 men were both among the FBI's most wanted, and here is where they were about to potentially work hand in hand with the Central Intelligence Agency. The plan, as recommended by Giancana, was to lace Castro's food or drink with a lethal poison, as this would be more reliable than using guns. So Giancana recruited a Cuban official named Juan Orta to carry out the hit. Orta had access to Castro and was even provided with pills containing, you guessed it, more botulinum toxin. However, after failing several times to poison Castro, Orta got cold feet and backed out. The CIA wasn't done trying, though, and dispatched another set of botulism pills to another candidate, Tony Verona, along with thousands of dollars. This time they planned to slip the poison into Castro's food at a restaurant he frequented in Havana, which served a chocolate milkshake that the Cuban leader adored. Verona was able to hand the poison to a worker at the restaurant and instructed them to slip it into Castro's chocolate milkshake. Fortunately, he was able to enjoy his chocolatey dairy treat without dying, as the would-be assassin seemingly botched the attempt out of nervousness. There are conflicting reports as to exactly how this occurred, with some Cuban intelligence officers saying they found the poison frozen in the coils of a freezer. Fabian Escalante wrote in his book that the assassin had accidentally broken the poison capsule in a rush of nervousness, causing it to be stuck to the freezer shelf, and thus making the poison pill and its contents useless. Having failed in their collusion with the Mafia to poison Castro, the CIA began really thinking outside of the box when it came to their plans for putting the Cuban leader inside one. They were aware that Castro had a particular fondness for scuba diving, and so they tried to orchestrate multiple other attempts on his life around that fact. This included trying to poison him with a wetsuit and building an explosive seashell. How artistic! It's also revealed by the Church Committee in 1963, the head of the CIA's anti-Castro task force, Desmond Fitzgerald, contemplated whether or not an exotic seashell could be rigged to explode and deposited in an area of the Caribbean Sea where Castro frequently went diving. The idea was that this spectacular shell would attract Castro's attention while underwater, but would in actuality be booby-trapped with explosives. So when Castro would pick it up, it would detonate and take him with it. Unsurprisingly, this plan was highly impractical, not just because it relied on the pure happenstance of Castro spotting this spectacular shell and picking it up, but also because the CIA couldn't find a shell large enough to fit the amount of explosives required to successfully kill him. Another scheme that was discussed by the CIA but was never put into action involved James Donovan, the man responsible for negotiating a deal with Castro regarding the release of prisoners taken during the Bay of Pigs invasion. While Donovan was successful in securing the release of thousands of imprisoned Cuban exiles, spoiler alert, he didn't actually end up killing Castro. But the CIA had at one point considered giving Donovan a scuba diving suit that Donovan would then pass on to Castro. This suit would have contained a fungus that passes on an infection known as Madura's foot, which causes damage to the skin tissue and the bones of the hands, feet, and other parts of the body. The CIA's Technical Services Division actually did purchase a diving wetsuit, coated its insides with the fungus, and even infected the breathing apparatus with tuberculosis bacilli. However, the suit never left the CIA laboratory, and an uncontaminated suit was given to Castro by Donovan. The CIA was back to the drawing board again, and considering using pills again since their more outlandish ideas didn't exactly hold any water. Of course, in order to administer poison to Castro, they need someone to get close to the communist leader. And, well, it's often been said that the ones we love end up being the ones that hurt us the most. And it almost ended up being the case. Fidel Castro wasn't just a revolutionary lover of chocolate milkshakes and a keen scuba diver, he was a notorious ladies' man too. Some reports suggest that he was close with around 35,000 women, with rumors that his guards would recruit women from the beaches around Havana. Castro was a pretty big flirt, littering his speech with innuendos, and even once joked about having multiple children, but no fewer than a dozen. Needless to say, the man got around, and the CIA saw an opening to use Castro's fraternizing as their way in. Enter one Marita Lorenz. Marita was a German-American woman whose mother had worked for the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, along with the US Army and the Pentagon following the Second World War. As for Marita's father, he operated a line of cruise ships, and it was by being aboard one of these that Marita first met Fidel Castro. In February 1959, when the Cuban Revolution had just taken control of the country, Marita was working aboard a ship called the MS Berlin with her father. They had pulled into the Havana harbor when Castro and his men appeared and asked to board the vessel. Marita had no idea Fidel was the man who had just seized control of Cuba, but he certainly made an impression on her, and the two began a long, tumultuous affair from then on. Castro would fly her to Havana aboard a private jet, and it's believed that Marita fell pregnant during the affair. There was a lot of contradictory accounts about the exact details of this. While Lorenz claims Castro is the father of her son, she also claimed to have been 7 months pregnant in 1959, meaning there was likely more than one pregnancy. When she revealed this to Castro, he apparently wanted nothing to do with the child, and Marita was drugged by one of his aides and woke up in a hospital, with the pregnancy having been terminated. Naturally, this caused the Cuban leader's now former lover to turn on him, returning to the United States. Thanks to her mother's spy connections, Marita was put in touch with the anti-communist groups in Miami that were backed by the CIA, where she was ultimately recruited and convinced to carry out an assassination attempt on the agency's behalf. She received several weeks' worth of training in order to get close to Castro and dose him with more of the CIA's favorite snack for foreign political leaders, botulism toxin pills. So in the winter of 1960, likely fueled by her scorn for her former lover, Marita boarded a plane, flew back to Cuba under the guise of taking care of her personal matters with Castro. Her mission was, as it had been with the failed mob hit, to meet with the Cuban leader for long enough to sneak the pills into his drink, and if successful, he would be dead in under a minute, and she'd have her revenge. However, as soon as Marita made her way back to the city of Havana, she realized that she felt conflicted about the mission and couldn't follow through with it. Some reports indicate that she'd stored the pills in a face cream jar, and this caused them to melt, meaning she'd have little chance of forcing them into Castro's mouth while he slept. Others, including Marita Lorenz herself, claim that she'd been having doubts about the whole thing from the moment she boarded the plane. She did meet with Castro in a hotel room before she was scheduled to give a speech and had every opportunity to kill him. Instead, she confessed that she'd been sent there with the intention of assassinating him. He asked if she was meeting with the counter-revolutionaries in Miami, to which she said yes. When he asked if she was working with the CIA, Marita denied that she was, perhaps to avoid angering him, or possibly unaware of their involvement with the anti-Castro group that had recruited her. According to Lorenz's own account of the encounter, Castro then produced his pistol, but not to shoot his lover-turned-assassin. Instead, Castro reportedly handed the gun to Marita and offered her the chance to shoot him. Faced with someone sent to end his life, Castro was not only unsurprised, but almost chivalrous in his actions, allowing Marita to finish the job. But instead, unable to kill him, she unloaded the pistol, which equally didn't seem to surprise Castro, who apparently replied with, "You can't kill me. Nobody can kill me." Immediately, Marita fell into his arms and, well, how can we put this in a way that's safe for YouTube? It might have been her job to go kill the Cuban leader, but as it turned out, Marita got to fiddle Castro one more time. They do say you should try to love your work. Maybe it's possible to love it a little too much. Some of the saddest CIA attempts to take out Castro gave up the ghost of killing him entirely, instead choosing to assassinate his reputation, with equally embarrassing results. In 1960, Castro was planning to give an important radio address to the people of Cuba. Immediately, the CIA sprung into action with the diabolical plan of spraying an aerosolized LSD compound into the radio station, hoping that Castro would start tripping and sound like a maniac during his speech, reducing his credibility in the eyes of the Cuban people. An effect that, even if it had worked, would only have been effective for as long as it took for the Cubans to realize that Castro was not in fact insane, but had just been drugged with psychedelics by the CIA. However, their plot involving thallium salts was truly a new low, where the objective was not to assassinate Castro, but to assassinate his iconic beard. Yeah, we're being serious. The plan was to dust the chemical onto Castro's shoes, which would cause him to lose his beard, eyebrows, and his pubic hair. Though, like many other wild murder moonshots, this one never came to fruition. Given that the CIA was now officially resorting to the classic college party prank of squirting Nair onto someone's pants while they're blackout drunk, it's clear that the well was running dry. The craziest thing is that the scope of these assassinations went way beyond Eisenhower and Kennedy. Lyndon B. Johnson hosted his fair share of Castro assassination attempts, and Richard Nixon's tenure saw the largest number of botched attempts to kill Castro of all U.S. presidents, coming in at a whopping 184 attempts. As the CIA and the Cuban exiles who were eager to see the country return to its prior non-communist ways became more desperate, their ideas for murdering El Comandante became a lot less subtle. Well, if you can call literally any of this subtle. Despite Gerald Ford's executive order to put a stop to all these wacky assassination attempts in the year 2000 when Castro was due to give a speech in Panama, the idea was floated to put 200 pounds of explosives under his podium and blow him to kingdom come. Once again, this would never come to fruition. The four-man explosives team, composed of angry Cuban exiles, were intercepted by Castro's security team and arrested. Their ringleader was Luis Posada, who you might have guessed was a CIA operative. They would later be pardoned to go live in Florida with many other Cuban exiles because it seems that Castro was strangely forgiving of attempts on his life. Until his death in 2016, Castro developed a reputation for being seemingly immortal after surviving all these attempts. The truth is, while Castro was no doubt a very lucky man, he likely owes his longevity to a mix of his extremely competent security team and the extreme incompetence of many of the CIA assets sent to take his life. Castro was always on the move, with a huge cadre of body doubles to ensure that if the CIA ever did get windfall, it wouldn't be on him. But strangely, while modern dictators like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un are practically paranoid wrecks about the prospect of being assassinated by one of their many enemies, Castro didn't let the knowledge that people were almost constantly trying to kill him put a damper on his daily activities. When once asked about whether he wears a bulletproof vest, he responded, "I have a moral vest." And if his track record is anything to go by, maybe more world leaders should look into wearing moral vests. I mean, it certainly worked for Fidel Castro. For more on the US's communist thorn in their side, check out How a Nuclear World War III Almost Happened, or watch this video instead.